Hey, I'm Dr. Stuart R. Miller, and I want to talk to you about something that's probably happening to you right now. Something that most people don't want to admit, don't want to face, and honestly don't want to talk about. But I'm going to talk about it anyway because your brain health depends on it. Your brain is beginning to rot. And I know that sounds dramatic. I know it sounds like I'm exaggerating, but hear me out because the science behind this is actually pretty compelling. And by the end of this conversation, I think you're going to understand why I'm being so direct with you. So what am I talking about? What's this thing that's happening to your brain right now as you're sitting there reading this or watching this or listening to this? It's something that most of us are doing multiple times a day. It's something that has become so normal, so routine, that we don't even think about it anymore. We just do it automatically without questioning whether it's good for us or not. I'm talking about chronic inactivity combined with constant mental stimulation. Now let me break that down because I don't want you to gloss over what I just said. We're talking about two things happening simultaneously. We're physically inactive, sitting, slouching, barely moving our bodies, while at the exact same time we're bombarding our brains with constant information, constant stimulation, constant noise, constant input. This combination, this toxic mix of physical stagnation and mental overload is actually doing damage to your brain. Real, measurable, observable damage. The brain needs movement. Let me start with something basic. Your brain needs movement. And I don't just mean a little bit of movement. I mean real, intentional, sustained physical activity. Here's what most people don't realize. Your brain didn't evolve to sit still. For millions of years, human brains developed in bodies that were constantly moving, hunting, gathering, exploring, running from danger, building shelter. Your ancestors weren't sitting in office chairs for 8 hours a day. They weren't lying in bed scrolling through their phones for 2 hours before sleep. Your brain evolved to be in a moving body. And when your brain is in a moving body, all sorts of beneficial things happen. Your hippocampus, that's the part of your brain that's crucial for memory and learning. It actually grows. It gets physically larger. Blood flow increases to your brain. Oxygen gets delivered more efficiently. Neurotransmitters that make you feel good, that help you think clearly, that protect you from depression and anxiety. They all get produced more abundantly. But here's what happens when you don't move. Your brain doesn't get that stimulation. The blood flow slows down, the neurons don't fire as robustly, the protective neurotransmitters don't get released in the same quantities. Your hippocampus actually shrinks. Over time, your cognitive abilities decline, your memory gets worse, your ability to learn new things diminishes, your mood deteriorates, and we're not just talking about a little bit of decline. We're talking about measurable, significant changes in brain structure and function. Scientists have looked at sedentary people who sit for long periods every day, and compared their brains to active people. And the difference is shocking. The sedentary people show more signs of cognitive decline, more brain atrophy, more cognitive dysfunction. This is real. This is happening in your brain right now if you're sedentary. But then we add the stimulation. Now here's where it gets worse, because you're not just sitting still. You're sitting still while simultaneously bombarding your brain with constant information input. Think about what you're doing right now. You might be watching a video. You're reading text. There's probably music playing. Maybe there are notifications going off on your phone. Maybe you're thinking about something else entirely while you're trying to focus on this. Your brain is being hit with information from multiple sources simultaneously. This is called cognitive overload. And it's becoming the default state for most people in the modern world. Your brain has what we call a working memory. This is the mental workspace where you're actively processing information. It's where you're thinking, analyzing, deciding. And here's the thing, this working memory has limits. It can only handle so much information at one time. In the past, people's brains had to deal with one primary stream of information at a time. You were having a conversation with one person. You were reading one book. You were doing one task. Your working memory wasn't being stretched beyond its limits. But now your working memory is constantly being pushed to its absolute maximum, and it's being pushed past its maximum. You're trying to work while checking emails, while listening to music, while your phone is buzzing with notifications, while you're thinking about what you need to do later. Your brain is essentially in a state of constant overload. And what happens when you chronically overload a system? It breaks down, it burns out, it deteriorates. The rot begins. So let's talk about what rot actually means in this context. I'm using that word deliberately because it's evocative, but let me be more specific about what's actually happening biologically. When your brain is chronically unstimulated physically and chronically overstimulated mentally, several things start to happen. First, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that handles executive function, decision-making, impulse control, and rational thought, starts to weaken. It's like a muscle that's not being used properly. It's being asked to do too much without the physiological support it needs. So it starts to atrophy. It starts to function less effectively. Second, your ability to focus and concentrate starts to deteriorate. When your brain is in a constant state of multitasking and overstimulation, it loses the ability to engage in deep, sustained focus. The neural pathways that support concentration get weaker. You become increasingly unable to focus on one thing for an extended period. Third, your emotional regulation starts to fall apart. When your prefrontal cortex is weakened and your brain isn't getting the movement-based neurotransmitter support it needs, you become more prone to anxiety, depression, irritability, and emotional instability. You're more reactive, less able to manage your emotions. Fourth, your memory starts to decline, both your short-term working memory and your long-term memory. You have more difficulty retaining new information. You forget things more easily. You have less mental clarity. Fifth, your cognitive processing speed slows down. It takes you longer to understand things, longer to make decisions, longer to solve problems. Your brain is literally processing information more slowly. And all of this is happening while your brain is also developing what we might call attention fragmentation. Your brain is literally being rewired to operate in a state of constant partial attention. You're never fully focused on anything. You're always somewhat distracted. And this becomes your new normal. This becomes what your brain expects. This is the rot. This is the deterioration. This is what happens when you combine chronic physical inactivity with chronic mental overstimulation. Why this is happening to you specifically. Now you might be thinking, okay, Dr. Miller, that's interesting, but surely this doesn't apply to me. I'm not that sedentary. I move around, I exercise sometimes, and maybe that's true. But I want you to think about something. How much of your day are you actually in motion? And I don't mean little movements like walking from your car to your office. I mean sustained, intentional cardiovascular movement that gets your heart rate up and your blood flowing. For most people, the answer is not much. Most people get maybe 30 minutes of intentional exercise a few times a week if they're doing well, and that's it. The rest of the time, they're sitting in their car, at their desk, on their couch, in bed. That's roughly 23.5 hours a week of your life when you're sedentary, or mostly sedentary. And during how much of that time are you consuming information? How much of that time is your brain being stimulated by screens, by content, by notifications, by the constant stream of digital input? For most people, it's basically all of it. You're sitting and consuming information almost every waking moment. So yes, this probably applies to you, not because I'm being presumptuous, but because this is the reality of modern life for most people. This is the default mode. This is what we're all doing, and your brain is rotting as a result. The specific damage we're seeing. Now, let me get into the research for a moment because I want you to understand that I'm not just making this up. This isn't speculation. There's actual science behind what I'm talking about. Neuroscientists have been studying the effects of sedentary behavior on the brain for years, and what they're finding is pretty alarming. One major study looked at middle-aged adults and found that those who spent more than 8 hours a day sitting had significantly reduced gray matter volume in their medial temporal lobe, the part of the brain associated with learning and memory. That's not a small finding. That's actual physical shrinkage of brain tissue. Another study found that people who engage in regular physical activity have larger hippocampi than sedentary people. The hippocampus is crucial for memory formation, so physically active people are literally better at learning and remembering. Their brains are physically larger in the regions that matter most for cognitive function. Studies on screen time and cognitive function have found similar concerning trends. People who spend excessive time on screens, and we're talking multiple hours a day, which is most of us, show reduced attention spans, reduced ability to engage in deep thinking, and reduced cognitive performance. And here's something particularly interesting. Studies on multitasking show that people who regularly multitask, people who are constantly switching between different tasks and information streams, actually become worse at multitasking. And they also become worse at focusing on single tasks. Their cognitive flexibility decreases. Their working memory capacity shrinks. It's like their brain is being trained to be bad at thinking. So the rod isn't metaphorical, it's not poetic, it's neurobiological, it's happening at the level of brain structure and brain chemistry and brain function, the cascading effects. But here's what really concerns me. It's not just that your brain is physically changing, it's that these changes cascade into every other area of your life. When your prefrontal cortex is weakened, when your ability to focus is diminished, when your emotional regulation is compromised, all of that shows up in your behavior. It shows up in your relationships. It shows up in your work. It shows up in your decision making. You become more irritable. You have less patience. You're quicker to anger or frustration. You make worse decisions. You're less able to plan for the future. You're less able to delay gratification. You're more impulsive. You're more reactive. Your relationships suffer because you're not fully present with people. You're physically there, but mentally you're partially elsewhere. You're not listening as deeply. You're not connecting as authentically. Your work suffers because you can't focus on complex, important tasks for extended periods. You're constantly context switching. You're constantly being interrupted by notifications. Your productivity drops. The quality of your thinking drops. Your health suffers because you're not exercising enough, and the stress hormones that build up from constant cognitive overload are taking a toll on your body. You're more prone to illness. You have less energy. You sleep worse. Your self-esteem suffers because you're not accomplishing what you want to accomplish. You're not being who you want to be. You're not performing at your potential, and you know it. So the rod isn't just a brain problem. It becomes a life problem. What's actually going wrong? Let me try to explain this in a way that might resonate with you. Imagine your brain as an organization. It has different departments. The executive department is the prefrontal cortex. That's where decisions get made, where strategy happens, where the big picture gets considered. Then you have your memory department. That's handling storage and retrieval of information. You have your emotional regulation department. That's managing your feelings and your responses to situations. You have your attention department. That's deciding what gets your focus and what doesn't. Now imagine what happens when your executive department is understaffed and overworked. The executives are exhausted. They haven't been getting the resources they need. The rest of the organization starts to suffer. Decisions get made poorly. Memory function decreases. Emotional regulation breaks down. Attention becomes scattered. That's what's happening to your brain. The understaffing comes from lack of physical activity. Your brain needs movement to generate the neurotransmitters and the blood flow and the oxygen it needs to function optimally. Without that, your executive department is running on fumes. The overwork comes from constant cognitive stimulation. Your brain is being asked to process information constantly. It's never getting a break. It's never getting a chance to consolidate, to process, to rest. So your brain is exhausted, and exhausted brains don't function well. The modern trap. Here's what I think is particularly insidious about this situation. The things that are causing the problem, sedentary behavior and constant digital stimulation, are also the things that are most convenient and most rewarded in modern society. You're rewarded for sitting at a desk and working. That's where the money is. That's where the status is. That's what society values. You're incentivized to be constantly connected, constantly consuming information, constantly responsive to digital demands. Your job might literally require this. Your social life might require this. Your sense of connection to the world might depend on this. So you're caught in a trap. The things that are destroying your brain are the things that society is basically forcing you to do. And the solution, moving your body, disconnecting from digital stimulation, engaging in deep focus and slow thinking, those things are increasingly seen as luxuries, indulgences, things you do when you have time, which for most people means almost never. So people continue on the path toward brain rot because the system incentivizes it. But wait, there's more. And if that weren't enough, there's another layer to this. The constant stimulation from digital devices is actually addictive, neurochemically, literally addictive. When you get a notification, when you see something interesting on your screen, when you get a like or a comment or a message, your brain releases dopamine. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter associated with reward and motivation. And it feels good. Your brain starts to crave that dopamine hit. So you find yourself checking your phone more and more, scrolling more, consuming more content, because your brain is literally being trained to seek out that stimulation. But here's the problem. The dopamine hit from digital stimulation is short-lived and shallow. It doesn't last, so you need more and more stimulation to feel the same reward. You build up tolerance. And meanwhile, the deeper, more sustained forms of satisfaction, completing meaningful work, having genuine human connection, achieving a goal, those require sustained focus and effort. They require your brain to do hard work. And if your brain is already exhausted from constant overstimulation and lack of physical activity, you don't have the capacity for that deeper satisfaction. So you end up on a hedonic treadmill, chasing increasingly more digital stimulation for increasingly less satisfaction. And your brain is getting worse and worse at doing the things that would actually make you genuinely happy and fulfilled. This is the trap. And most people don't even realize they're in it. What happens over time? Let me paint a picture of what I'm seeing in people who continue down this path. In their 20s and 30s, it might not be that obvious. Their brains are still relatively young and resilient. They can get away with a lot, but by their 40s and 50s, the effects become undeniable. They're struggling to concentrate. They can't remember things like they used to. They're more anxious, more irritable. They're not as sharp. They're not thinking as clearly. They go to doctors. They get tested. Sometimes they get diagnosed with ADHD. Sometimes it's anxiety or depression. Sometimes it's just accepted as a normal part of aging. But here's the thing, much of this isn't normal aging. It's accelerated cognitive decline caused by decades of sedentary behavior and chronic overstimulation. And by the time they reach their 60s and 70s, they're dealing with significant cognitive issues. Memory problems, difficulty learning new things, reduced mental flexibility. Sometimes it progresses to more serious conditions like dementia. Now, some of that might be inevitable with age, but a lot of it could have been prevented. A lot of it could have been slowed down or reversed if the person had maintained physical activity, if they had managed their cognitive stimulation, if they had made different choices along the way, but they didn't know. They didn't understand that the way they were living was damaging their brain, and by the time they realized it, the damage was substantial. The good news. Okay, so I've painted a pretty dark picture here, and I want to make sure you don't walk away from this thinking that if you're already in this situation, it's too late, because it's not. The brain has what we call neuroplasticity. That means it can change, it can adapt, it can heal. Even if you've spent years in a sedentary state with constant cognitive overstimulation, you can reverse course. If you start moving your body regularly, and I'm talking about sustained cardiovascular activity several times a week, your brain will start to change. Your hippocampus will start to grow again. Blood flow will increase. Neurotransmitter production will improve. If you reduce your cognitive overstimulation, if you cut back on the constant digital input, if you create space for boredom and rest, if you practice deep focus on meaningful work, your prefrontal cortex will start to strengthen again. Your ability to concentrate will improve. Your emotional regulation will get better. It doesn't happen overnight. Brain changes take time, but they do happen. The research is clear on this. People who make these changes see improvements in their cognitive function, their mood, their ability to focus, their overall quality of life. So there is hope. There is a path forward, what you actually need to do. So let me be concrete about this. If you want to stop the rot, if you want to reverse it, here's what you need to do. Move your body every day, not just a little bit. I'm talking about 30 to 60 minutes of sustained cardiovascular activity. Walking counts if you're doing it briskly. Swimming, cycling, running, dancing, whatever it is, get your heart rate up, get your blood flowing, make it a non-negotiable part of your day. Reduce your digital stimulation. This is harder than it sounds because it's so pervasive. But try this. Create windows of time where you're completely disconnected from digital devices. Maybe it's the first hour after you wake up. Maybe it's the last hour before bed. Maybe it's during meals. Start with something manageable and build from there. Practice deep focus. Choose one meaningful task. Block out time. Eliminate distractions. And work on that one task with your full attention. Not multitasking, not partial attention. Full focus. Do this daily. Get adequate sleep. Your brain needs sleep to consolidate memories, to process information, to restore itself. If you're not getting 7 to 9 hours a night, you're not giving your brain what it needs. And the constant digital stimulation before bed is destroying your sleep quality. So disconnect from devices before you sleep. Prioritize human connection, not digital connection, real in-person human connection, conversation, eye contact, presence. Your brain needs this. It craves this, and it helps regulate your nervous system and your emotions. These are the fundamentals. This is what actually works. The bigger picture. Look, I understand that implementing these changes is harder than it sounds. I understand that you're embedded in a system that incentivizes exactly the opposite of what I'm recommending. I understand that everyone around you is probably in the same trap, and you might feel like you're being weird or unrealistic if you try to do something different. But here's what I want you to really hear. Your brain health is the foundation of your entire life. If your brain is rotting, everything else suffers. Your relationships, your work, your health, your happiness, your sense of purpose and meaning. So this isn't a nice to have. This isn't optional. This is essential. And the fact that it's inconvenient, that it goes against the grain of modern society, that it requires you to do things differently than everyone else, that's actually a feature, not a bug. The fact that most people aren't doing this is exactly why you should do it. You have an opportunity to make different choices, to protect your brain, to optimize your cognitive function, to be sharper, happier, more present, more capable. That's the real choice in front of you. Final thoughts. So your brain is beginning to rot when you're sedentary and chronically overstimulated. That's the science. That's what's happening. But it doesn't have to keep happening. You can change course. You can reverse this trend. You can have a healthier, more functional, more resilient brain. It starts with movement. It starts with disconnecting from constant digital stimulation. It starts with these small choices made consistently over time. And it starts right now, today, not tomorrow, not next week, today. Because every day you don't make these changes is another day your brain is deteriorating. Every day you do make these changes is a day you're healing, growing, improving. The choice is yours. I'm Dr. Stuart R. Miller, and I hope you choose wisely.